So before we begin this delightful conversation, I want to make a plug for all of you leaders out there who are very likely struggling with overwhelm in your life. We have so many ambitions and responsibilities in our roles as leaders, but we often fail to be able to even address the most important work that needs to be done just due to the sheer volume or the mismanagement of it. So it's for this reason that I've decided to give away for free the entire self-management module of the Clearing Obstacles Roadmap. Now, the full roadmap itself is the comprehensive set of tools that I use with all of my clients to help them in our coaching journey, but it always starts every time with the self-work or self-management specifically. I'm deeply committed to helping you get traction in your life so you can crush those frustrations of overwhelm that are holding you back from the success that you're living for. All 11 lessons stand on their own, but together they delve into solutions that extend far beyond mere productivity tools. So go to bestself.coach/free to get started today. I want you to have your own self-management operating system to help you clear the obstacles that are in your way. Can't wait to see you there.
You know what I'm also noticing is those companies that are doing exactly what you just said, Dan, they attract some really high caliber people.
Right.
And they retain them because the A players want to work somewhere where they're challenged and promoted and encouraged and supported. And they want that sense of everyone's rising together.
Yeah.
They don't want people to be slackers.
Yeah.
They want to be challenged in a way that they're going to grow as a professional, that they're going to find ways to thrive.
Right.
So when you create the right kind of culture, you attract the kind of people that get it and that they want to contribute. So it continues to feed on itself.
Welcome to Season 2 of Clearing Obstacles, the podcast for leaders and those that want to be, because no organization, not even yours, can thrive without effective leadership. Now, as you master this skill, it will become the superpower that gains the love and respect of your team, the freedom you seek in your life and business, and ultimately, the success of your vision. I'm your host and coach, Dan Kent, with Best Self Coaching, and in Season 2, we're bringing you the voices of thought leaders who have a unique and valuable perspective to share on how to reimagine and redefine leadership in our world today. We'll be diving into topics of vision and authority and accountability, management, culture, vulnerability, self-awareness, and much more, because they all fall on the shoulders of today's leaders. Are you one of those exceptional people? Well, you can be. Our guests all have extensive theoretical and philosophical depth that's also matched by their experience in the practical application of those principles. And we think you're going to agree. So, all of you emerging and evolving leaders, buckle up as we clear the obstacles to help you get there from here. So today's guest, Karen Natzel, is an exceptional soul who I happened to connect with rather organically through LinkedIn, which unfortunately seems more rare than ever these days. The platform has kind of devolved over the years to become a bit spammy and opportunistic for my palate. But nevertheless, through some authentic engagement over time, it was so clear that Karen had some wonderful things to say about leadership. As a self-described business therapist and the founder of K Communications, Karen has earned her chops through relentless pursuit of meaningful change for the organizations who've had the benefit of working with her. And we're fortunate to have her with us today to share some of what she's learned over her decades of experience, helping to shape leaders and their teams, as she specializes in transforming the communication, the cultures, and the overall health of their organizations. Karen, welcome to the Clearing Obstacles podcast. It's great to finally have you here.
Thank you so much, Dan. I remember when we first met and made some time together.
Yeah.
I was thinking there were so many ways we were in sync. And that was what I was craving, is just this collaboration, what I call a worthy collaborator, someone who is a kindred spirit, someone who has intellectually rigor, the curiosity. And so it was fun to explore that and build the community together.
I appreciate that. And likewise, I felt the same thing when the first couple of times that we connected and then we had a full-blown conversation. I was like, all right, Karen, I'm just going to say it. I need you on the podcast. There's just too much. Our conversations got too lively and too jam-packed full of stuff. And I thought, this is the kind of stuff that our listeners need to hear. So maybe start us off. Tell us a little bit about K Communications, where you're at today. What got you here?
Yeah. I started the business just over 20 years ago, originally in a default mode. I was laid off as a marketing director, business development director, And I thought, well, I'll just do this until I figure out what's next, and I started thriving. I loved the complexity, the flexibility, the variety. I realized in my previous life, I would get restless about every 3 years.
Yeah, I know
And
that cycle.
and I love my autonomy, and I love actually being behind the scenes
Yeah.
and supporting teams in that way. And so it started as a marketing consulting firm
Okay.
and around branding and developing kind of the brand, the sense of who they were, the communications that would go out externally, pre-social media.
Uh-huh.
And while I loved that, I love the strategy, I love the creativity, and I really believed that every employee is an ambassador of the brand.
Mm-hmm.
What was missing in a lot of this was a sense of authenticity. People wanted to spin the brand
Mm-hmm.
to what they thought their clients wanted to hear.
Mm.
And that didn't land with me very well. And then on top of that, I would be working with my clients and they would be talking to me about all kinds of things that had nothing to do with marketing.
Yeah.
And I realized, wow, they have so much on their shoulders.
Yeah.
Being a leader is stressful. They have no one really to turn to as a confidential sounding board.
Yeah.
Even if some of these folks had their spouses as their business partners, but their spouses didn't give them an objective look at the things.
Right. No.
And they couldn't say things the way they wanted to say things to their staff or the board of directors or their fellow leaders. So I became this place where they could think out loud. And I jokingly said, I feel more like their therapist than their marketing consultant. And I realized there was something there. There was a niche for me.
Yeah.
And it hit all the boxes for what I love to do in a way I didn't even know existed that I could serve my clients.
Yeah.
So I evolved marketing and doing the brand work into doing the internal work. So it's essentially inside out. And what I learned is that the brand really is a representation of the culture. If you're doing it right,
Right.
that the idea that your employees are your ambassadors, it's not something they put on to go out into the community. It's how you do what you do. And so you can't fake it. And it's
Right.
the beauty.
Right. And makes for an incredibly powerful brand because people feel like, the concept about marketing and sales is and my clients, forgive me, you've heard this spiel a million times. We buy from a place of emotion and then we rationalize it. We tend to think it's the other way around. I'm going to make a rational decision in this purchase. It goes the other way. We buy from an emotional place. And when it comes to emotions, our intuition is so strong. I think for the most part, we can sniff it out when it's an inauthentic brand or there's some kind of spin to it, as you said, that was a real turnoff to you that kind of caused your desire to sort of force this transition into a different or evolve this transition into a different model for your business.
Well, and we're more cynical as consumers of any brand.
Yeah, for sure.
Products or services. And so the upside to that is it demands an authenticity. It demands us to build trust in a way that is get to know each other at a relationship level. And it takes more time to do that and do it well.
Mm-hmm.
It takes more integrity. It's uncharted territory because it's a complex, messy part of business, the human side.
Yeah. It sounds like you don't think of it as very binary, a brand as like internal or external facing, that it's really unified the way you're speaking about it.
I like it better that way.
Mm-hmm.
I was working with this one client where they're an aviation lab out of Florida, and in their work, their clients come and work side by side with their technicians in the lab and doing all this testing. And so they decided to level up their customer service, and they had these 14 tenets of how they would work with their clients. And they were great. They were a great list of how we want to show up. But I looked at them and said, why would you just do that when the clients show up?
Right.
Why don't you just do that with each other? If you treated each other with the same care you want to treat with the clients, one, you don't just have to turn it on when someone shows up and try to be someone you're not.
Right.
You integrate it into how you do what you do. Your internal relationships get better.
Yeah.
The way in which you can serve the client gets better. It just becomes your DNA, your MO.
Yeah. It's the way you do it around here. A previous guest of ours, Gustavo Rossetti from Fearless Culture, talked about that. And he kind of talked about one of those telltale signs of what a culture is like when you go in, when you show up in person and say, could I speak to the owner or the founder or whatever, and watch what happens to the altitude of everybody's shoulders? Do they go up, or what's the tone when somebody asks for that, right? That's a great telltale for what is the culture actually like inside of this company.
Another telltale sign is how candid are they in their conversations? So one thing I'll listen for when I'm sitting at a leadership team meeting is what conversation are they not having? Where are they sort of sugarcoating, kind of edging around a topic, not saying it directly? One of the time I was working with this leadership team and I knew all the elephants in the room and I knew they weren't raising them like I was trying to get them to do. So I asked them as we were coming to a close, I said, let me ask this differently, because I kept trying to get them to speak the truth, that they needed to have that level of engagement at the leadership team. And I said, what are you holding back from saying right now that you're going to go back to the water cooler and talk about?
What a great and provocative question to give.
Oh my gosh, it wasn't shoulders up and down, but it was guilty faces.
Yeah.
How does she know that? It's the human condition to avoid difficult conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so learning how to have conversations in a really kind, respectful, and clear way. I often tell people I do not believe in political correctness, and they get this relief. So what I do believe in, though, is kind and respectful dialogue.
Fair.
So I really want you to have honest conversations in a way that you're listening to each other. You're hearing what's not being said. You are engaged in such a way that you really care about the person.
Right.
And you're saying what needs to be said. So you're getting to a place either of alignment or getting to a place of understanding each other, because it's not about coddling or sugarcoating. That doesn't get us anywhere.
Right.
It doesn't show respect.
Right.
But a telltale sign of a healthy culture is when people can engage in robust dialogue.
Right. Robust dialogue, is that business therapist speak for arguments?
Great question. I stay away from arguments only because people shut down. And so it's not meant as a euphemism. It is meant as a way to invite. I think words matter.
Yeah.
And if we invite people into a robust dialogue, the expectation is, I want you to contribute. You need to speak your perspective, because that particular person may have an angle that the problem wouldn't be solved without knowing that.
Right. Right.
But if they feel like it's not a psychologically safe place to speak up, then you're missing out on a really good piece of data.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so how do you confront those, Karen, when you're in a group dynamic like that? And it's very clear, because this is how we all are as humans. We have these different dynamics and upbringings and baggage and personality types, all that fun stuff around emotional intelligence. How do you address that when it's very clear that there are personalities within that group who are more reserved, who, what's the expression, some of us talk to think and others of us think to talk. And that latter group, those they're quietly sitting and they're thinking about it and they're waiting for the right opportunity to say and get the clarity for how do you address those folks who might be more reserved in their contribution?
I'm currently working with a team of leaders where of 10 and 4 are definitely strong introverts. So I get a lot of opportunity to practice just that.
I'll bet.
And I start in the beginning to set the expectation that I want to hear everyone's voice. And I ask everyone's commitment to full participation. And I said that might look different for each person, but I definitely want to hear everyone's voice. And so what I will do is call on the person who hasn't spoke for a while. And I'm really careful not to say something like, so Jason, I haven't heard from you yet.
Okay.
That's not the right way to invite someone.
Now you just put a spotlight on their self-consciousness.
Yep, exactly. What I would say is, I'd really be interested in what you have to offer here, Jason, because I know that, you do a lot of work in this domain.
Right.
So I'm sure that, so I just find ways to invite their participation, and then I slow everything down. And because introverts are very thoughtful, and if you give them space, we're not used to having space. We fill it. Especially us extroverts. So if there's a gap, it's kind of fun to let everything settle back down and I think Susan Scott from Fierce Conversations says, let silence do the heavy lifting.
Ooh, I like that.
Right?
Yeah.
That pause. If you ask a question and just wait, hold space.
Yeah.
that person has time to reflect and be thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
It teaches us more verbalizers and externalists and the extroverts to go, oh, that's really great. And almost every time, Dan, the introverts I get engaged have something really brilliant to add.
Right.
Because they've been paying attention in a way that is different.
Do you find that they have been missing from that conversation over time, and you kind of are able to bring that out in your sessions with organizations, or they've kind of been there all along and you're sort of helping to coax that and facilitate it?
It really depends on the organization and the team dynamics.
Sure.
And there can be power struggles, there can be personality clashes, there can be years at a firm. What I find that tends to happen is they get kind of washed out by the louder voices. Mm-hmm. But there also might be side conversations that are happening. And if there's an astute and aware leader, he or she is probably going around and taking the pulse and checking in and knowing their team's strengths.
Right.
And if that person isn't speaking up as often in the public environment, their voice might be getting funneled in different ways, which is something. It's a benefit to at least the voice is getting some kind of airtime. What I think is important, though, is that they have their own brand and they're seen by their peers as contributing and having a perspective that's worth listening to.
Yeah. So valuable. Like you said, a lot of times those quieter voices are the more thoughtful ones. And if the extroverted loudmouths like I can be sometimes, like if they just zip it for a minute, they would actually have the opportunity to hear that really useful, powerful perspective from the other players in the room.
I tell extroverts that if you feel compelled to talk, pause and ask why.
Say more.
And I've done this myself because there's an excitement about contributing for some of us. And it's fun, it's collaborative, it's energizing. And if I feel like I'm just speaking so that I can prove that I know something, that's something to pay attention to. If I'm speaking because I'm really excited and I think there's something I can add, it's a different perspective that I'm bringing or a different motivation. So if I'm staying quiet, also be curious. Why?
Yeah.
Is it a fear? Is it I've spoke up before and it got shot down or someone talked over me? So there's a lot of stories we tell ourselves.
Oh gosh.
And emotional intelligence is this ability to I'm having this emotion and to be able to name it precisely as much as one can and notice the conditions in which it's evolved. Did it get triggered? Is it a frustration? We so quickly as humans tell an entire story in seconds in our brain about what just transpired.
Yeah.
And it either elevates our relationships or it deteriorates one.
Yeah.
And left unattended, it can be like termites in a relationship. And all of a sudden we lose trust and respect based on something we haven't even vetted and we don't know is true. Right?
Yeah.
You've probably been there. You've seen it. Yeah.
Hundreds of times a day with myself. Our brains, just our human brains can't handle cognitive dissonance or gaps. And so and it's not a flaw. I mean, it's a feature. That's part of what makes us human is we have to connect the dots. We have to make some sense of the story or the missing components. And so we make up a story. And what the conversation I'll often have with myself, to be transparent, is is the story you're making right now useful to you or not? Because you need to make up a story one way or the other in order to connect the dots, absent any further information. So if I don't have any further information I can get at the time, that story you're making up, is it useful, constructive, helpful, or is it destructive? Does it close you off? Does it alienate you from others? What's that story about?
Is it coming from fear? Is it coming from, hope? Where is the origin of the emotion? And this is where the business therapy comes, the kind of the deep work is it part of my patterns? And am I putting on an armor to feel safer so that I don't get rejected somehow?
Yeah. Okay. I want to lean into that real quick, Karen. So I love that term business therapist, and it might be a phrasing that's unfamiliar to our listeners. And so I want to dig into that a little bit because what you do is acutely attuned to the skills and the environment that needs to be present in order for people to open up and feel, like you said, like it's a safe space to share. So because you're exercising these tools on the regular, what are some, I hate to say this term tactic because it sounds so artificial and kind of contrived, but what are some best practices that you could recommend to leaders who aren't doing this every day? They're running their business, they're running the organization, they're doing their visioning work, and they're all of that. And you do this full time. So, you're going to have a much broader and probably sharper toolkit when it comes to creating that environment that is conducive to that feeling of safety that people can share things. What are some things that leaders can do in their organizations that will help to promote the same thing when Karen Natzel isn't in the room?
No, great question. As I'm sure you've said this to your clients, leaders will set the tone.
100%.
And consciously or not,
consciously or not, right? Even if you're not, the tone you're setting is that you're not present. So you're setting a tone whether you're in or not.
Funny you should say that, because that would be one of the things I'd recommend you listeners pay attention to is how present are you? Are you looking at your phone? Are you texting? Are you multiple screening it? I literally had a client where he had 2 screens. He was on mute on a conference call and he was texting his kid while he asked me to give him a report on the project we were working on together. And so I'm talking and I'm thinking, this guy's not listening to me.
Yeah.
So I just stopped and I waited and he looked up and he says, "What?" I said, "Well, I'll continue when you're listening." He says, "I'm listening to you." I go, "No, you're not." And he proceeded to tell me everything I had said. I was like, fascinating. So you did hear me.
Yeah.
But I'm going to tell you, your employees will not just push back on you like I just did.
Right. Ooh.
They are going to feel unheard and why bother and disrespected, and they're going to leave feeling deflated.
Right.
I want leaders to think about, what is your emotional wake when you engage with your team members?
It reminds me of the George Bernard Shaw quote. What is the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. It's one of my favorites.
That is actually on my business card, Dan. I love it so much.
Is it really? Oh my gosh.
So true. Yeah, it's so true. The communication breakdown is probably the number one ailment I see in every organization. So if a leader has, again, when you're minding your emotional wake, it doesn't mean that you're walking in eggshells or you're coddling or you have to be so careful about what you say. You come in with some presence that you care, you slow down. Generally, leaders are moving faster than the rest. They're head of people. Slow down, recalibrate, be present, listen, not with anything agenda or anything other than to really seek to understand that person.
Yeah.
Dan Brooks has a new book, How to Know a Person.
And
he talks a lot about the importance of validating. And it's not manipulating. It's not, I'm supposed to do this so that I can get what I want. It's the validation is when people feel seen and heard, you have a breakthrough. People feel like the relationship has meaning.
Yeah. Yeah. And that leader might hear everything that you just said, but if your perception is that they aren't present, that they didn't hear it, it's just the opposite happening. You're not feeling seen, heard, respected, valued.
Yeah.
So by knowing your audience, knowing the different learning styles, communication styles, being present with that and meeting them where they're at, that's a really good kind of best practice that you'd recommend. Yeah.
Yeah. Because imagine a leader is almost always thinking ahead of what the business needs, whether it's the visioning, strategy, goals, measuring the metrics, looking at the financials. When they go to talk to their team, whether that's their leadership team or they're an all staff or they see someone in the hallway, there's already a power differential. So you've got to keep that in mind. And there's an opportunity to mentor that person. It's called situational leadership, right? You go to where they are to help bring them along. And if you don't understand who this person is, what they're motivated by, what they care about, it's hard to communicate your vision in the context that's going to resonate. So if you take the time to get to know your people, and I had a coaching client that very technical individual, very ambitious. He was hungry to be the general manager of this organization. And so I was brought in to support him on what they called the soft skills, which I will want to get rid of that terminology.
Let's push back on that all day.
Yeah. It's the human skills. It's the relationship skills. It's the ability to connect with another person. And he hated small talk. And I said, okay, tell me more about that. And I said, I don't think I really like small talk either. What had to realize though, that people aren't going to warm up to you and tell you their concerns when you haven't said, hey, how was your weekend?
Right.
Hey, how was your kid's baseball game? Oh, how's Joe on, whatever it is. It's like giving them your time and listening in a way that you're paying attention to their life and what matters to them. One, will warm up to a conversation that then when you want to talk about the project, there's already some rapport.
Right.
And some safety, some established trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Speak more to that on the trust, because I feel like that's one of those elements. I mean, that's not one of the elements. I would say that's kind of core at creating that safe space where people feel like they can share their ideas and their perspectives on things that others on the team might not have the advantage of just by virtue of their position.
Yeah. Trust is so vital. And as we've seen it in our personal and professional lives, it takes a long time to build it.
Yeah.
People come from different places. We don't know what they've had for experiences. So they may have low trust because of it being violated in the past. It doesn't take much to break it.
No.
So there's lots, I think of trust in two ways. And I think came from Stephen Covey originally. In character, I trust that you're going to do the right thing when no one's looking, that you've got good judgment. You're going to represent the company well. I can trust your character. The other trust is competency. Are you good at what you do? Can you deliver this project? Can you do the design work? Can you manage the budget? Whatever the competency skill is. So those are kind of the buckets, so to speak, of how we can look at trust through those lenses. But one of the ways, it's a really simple concept. Do what we say we're going to do. Mm-hmm. Follow through on things. Mm-hmm. And when we do that, we feel like there's momentum we can get the results we're trying to do. But the simple act builds self-trust as well as trust with others. That if I say I'm going to do something, from I'm going to go for a run to I'll get that report to you tomorrow, make sure you're not overcommitting. Make sure that the thing you say you're going to do to yourself or to someone else, you have the capacity and commitment to follow through on it. And that will be the building blocks of real trust.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to run an experiment here. Let's do a lightning round. Let's compare personal experiences where you have seen in exquisite detail a leader compromising trust. I'll start just so you see what I'm getting at here.
Yeah.
Canceled meetings at the last minute from the leader of an organization.
Especially one-on-ones.
Especially.
Don't do it.
I mean, is there any more profound way to make somebody feel marginalized than to cancel the type of meeting that is a one-on-one where it's supposed to have some level of intimacy and specific care for that individual?
Yeah. I don't think leaders understand the impact that has on people.
Yeah. What's something you've seen where leaders have compromised trust in no uncertain terms?
Love this. When they say that things are just fine, have a few financial bumps in the road, and then they lay off people the next month.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's huge. Been there.
And it wasn't intentional. It was an attempt to not strike fear into people's hearts about how the business is doing. And I don't even know if they for sure understood that was going to happen.
Yeah.
The softening a message to make it easier on the audience. Mm-hmm. When you're basically implying that they can't handle the truth.
They can't handle it. Exactly right. Mm-hmm. Not only are you telling them white lies or what you perceive to be white lies, and that's damaging in and of itself, but you're conveying very clearly that they wouldn't have been able to handle the realities of the truth and the authenticity.
I kind of wonder too, if it isn't an attempt to kind of control the message, because when we have a kind of a control over it, we feel safer, more capable, and maybe a little protective. Maybe we thought, we might be able to get one more project that would keep those people employed.
Yeah.
So it could be over optimistic in their mm-hmm. way of looking at things, which a lot of entrepreneurs can be really optimistic.
Yeah.
Or
that's why many succeed. We have to be optimistic. This is too damn hard to not be optimistic about the future of our organization.
So that would be another way, is that we're too optimistic. It doesn't feel, it's hard to trust the message.
Yeah, well put. I'll throw another one out there. When a leader has a bright, shiny object or lack of focus. So let me give a more precise example. hey, I need you to build me that PowerPoint deck for the presentation that we're going to give next week. And the employee works diligently on it for, 30, 40 plus hours, puts everything together. The day comes and they go, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you, we're actually not needing that now because we canceled that meeting and we've decided to go another direction. And it's just kind of sprung on that person. They've put their heart and soul into this work and the leader failed to update them on the status of what was actually needed.
God, the way you describe that, it hurts just to hear it. And I'm not even the employee experiencing it. Yes, I have seen versions of that.
I've been that guy who's had it pulled out from under him multiple times by the same leader in a previous role that I was in. And oh God, how demoralizing is that? Because the next time you're engaged in a project like that or assigned a project like that, all you can think of is, why the hell should I? It's just going to get yanked out in the last minute anyway.
Playing on that theme, Dan, is what I call initiative fatigue. So it may not be a particular task or assignment a leader has given, but says, we're going to do this, the new year, we're going to roll out this new initiative. Maybe it's a wellness program. Maybe it's a new professional development program, whatever this thing is.
Yeah.
And it loses steam.
Yeah.
Because they didn't know how to roll it out properly. And so they go on to the next initiative, the next shiny object. So they have these different ways that want to improve the business or grow the business. And they haven't thought through, do we have the resources? What the roles and responsibilities will be to manage and lead this and implement it. And they think it's going to fix the thing. And maybe it's not the right initiative.
Right.
But they keep saying yes to all these initiatives.
Yeah.
And I've learned when I go into an organization to find out, what's the appetite for change? How much change have they been going through?
Ooh, great.
Because what I've heard employees say when I talk about, so what do you think of this initiative? You know what I hear? This too shall pass.
Oh, ouch.
Ouch. We'll just wait it out because nothing ever gets finalized here. We don't follow through.
Oh God, that hurts me hearing you talk about it that way, because I've seen it in some clients. I've been in organizations where that's been the temperature of follow through. I think that's the common thread of all, and this little lightning round is the follow through.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that, like you said, it's that integrity. It's, are you going to do what you say and say what you do?
Can I add one more?
Oh, please do.
When people speak ill of others.
Ooh, yeah.
So if I'm on the leadership team and
that's a torpedo.
My boss is speaking bad about the director of marketing, but I'm in his good graces and they're talking that it's awful. It's toxic.
Yeah.
So if I'm out, as soon as I leave his office, I can't trust that he's not speaking.
Absolutely not. Oh God, no.
Marketing director. And in fact, I'm pretty sure he is.
Yeah.
So we don't want to build these kind of cliques.
Right.
If you stay true to the rule, don't speak ill of others. If you have something that is bothering you, go to that person.
Right.
Go to your coach. Say, hey, how do I handle this? I'm frustrated. Yeah. It's okay to be frustrated. Part of emotional intelligence is like naming I'm frustrated, know why I'm frustrated, take personal accountability for it and say, I had this client who had just restructured. They had a whole new level of directors, and he pounds his fist. I'm going to hold them accountable. So 2 things went wrong here. He couldn't hold his executive assistant accountable. And so how are you going to hold a whole slew of directors with bigger personalities and bigger budgets and bigger, geographical domains to manage? And I said, tell me what that means. So we kind of walked through that a little bit. One, I don't think accountability should be thought of as a reprimand.
Right.
I think it should be an invitation for ownership. And it's an important distinction because no one wants to be held accountable. We want to drive it and own it and get results. So I think our relationship to accountability is typically unhealthy. The other thing is the way he would get frustrated, and he would just stew in his frustrations. I said, well, this is great. He goes, no, it's not. I said, no, it's not great that you're frustrated, but your frustrations tell you what you want. And let's get clear on what your expectations are so you can do a better job of communicating that to your directors. Because here's a big mistake I see leaders make. They think that their communications are really clear.
Right.
Their expectations are absolutely clear.
Well, to them, they are, right?
Exactly.
They've got all the context. They're flying at 30,000 feet. They see the whole lay of the land. So what's the matter with you that you don't understand?
it's easy to see how when they relay this to someone else, and typically we make mistakes like we'll say things, does that make sense? People say, sure. And they think it does. And you walk away thinking you're aligned.
Yeah, yeah.
And you didn't check for real understanding. So learning how to communicate, like you mentioned context, learning how to speak in a way that matters to the person in relationship to where they are, what they're responsible for, how they can contribute, providing that kind of context to both the background, historical, and the why,
Yeah.
and checking for understanding.
Yeah.
So not a yes or no, not a did that make sense.
Great.
I know this is going to sound hokey, but if you can say, hey, listen, we just covered a lot of ground. Can you tell me what you heard so we walk away knowing we're on the same page?
Great. I love that. I was about to ask you, okay, what does that mean to get a sense of the understanding? Because again, because of that power dynamic, very often you're just going to get a bunch of heads nodding. I want this meeting to be over. Let's move it along. Sure. Yeah, I understand you. I'll placate you and tell you, yeah, you're perfectly clear, boss.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to the psychologically safe. If an employee asks a question for clarification or pushes back a little bit, you cannot get defensive.
Mm-hmm.
You've just shut down that opportunity for someone to engage and contribute.
Right.
You might feel defensive. That's a good piece of information to take in and go, what's that about?
Yeah.
But you want to be able to say, tell me more about that.
Be big enough to hold the space for the dissent.
I like that.
So that at the end of the day, the best idea wins. Doesn't matter whose it was, but everybody had a chance to weigh in, and that's it. It's a meritocracy. It's a meritocracy of ideas, and you don't get the spectrum of ideas if you shut everybody down, because every time they weigh in, you shoot it down with your defensiveness.
You know, Dan, that makes me think of something else I think is really important on teams is this ability to collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
I think we use that word a lot. I've seen it in proposals. I've seen it in marketing tools, and people talk about that's, in professional services, our team is, strong collaborators. Yet I don't think we really think about breaking that down and what does it really take to be a good collaborator?
Mm.
What does it mean? And like in the world of improv, if you've ever experienced any of that.
Yes, and.
Yes, and exactly. It's not, yeah, but we've tried that before. Yeah, but this isn't going to work. And when you say yes, but you've negated whatever someone has said, they feel shut down. Yes, and is saying, that's interesting. And you're allowing for different realities to have some breathing room, have some space.
Right. It's additive, not reductive.
Yes.
Yeah.
So collaboration, to do it really well, you have to be willing to contribute to another person on your team. Mm-hmm. Not just to the idea, not just to the problem you're trying to solve, not just to the product or the game you're playing, but the human being across the table that you might not actually enjoy sometimes.
Yeah.
That means I have to give them feedback. I have to ask them questions. I have to challenge them respectfully. And I have to be willing to let someone else contribute to me.
Right. Avail yourself to the same kind of change that you're hoping you're going to make in others.
Bingo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sort of a segue to this, but I think it's actually sort of hand in glove, actually. You shared with me your K Communications manifesto, which our listeners will find in the show notes. One of the things that I noticed on your manifesto is the predominance of the word be. Tell me about the emphasis on that verb in particular.
I love that that's what you zeroed in on. So my manifesto came over years of thinking about how do I want to show up for my clients? And what is my why? Where do I get my juice? Where do I feel in the mornings when it's harder to generate and be disciplined? What do I care about? And it occurred to me that my presence mattered to create the safe, confidential sounding board I want them to have, and to role model for them the kind of presence I want to give them to give their teams.
Yeah.
So this idea of being, instead of focusing on the doing will come. But when we have this sense of clarity about how we want to show up, that's the tone we're going to set. Yeah. So in my manifesto, I talk about be authentic, be rigorous, be of service, be grateful. It's almost like the GPS, the cultivating this way of being on a regular basis is going to make an authentic brand for myself.
Yeah.
And for those firms and leaders and teams that it resonates with, we're going to be a good fit.
Yeah. What you're doing will be downstream of how you're being.
Oh, I like that. Yes.
There's a lot of work that I do with my clients about self-coaching too, where character traits are I'm not going to say more important. They're precursors to the character actions, right? The character traits. So if you are generous, if you are showing up with empathy, if you are showing up with humility, if you are showing up with vision, with passion, what you do is going to be a natural extension of how you're being. And so we end up working a lot, as I'm sure you do too, knowing just kind of your approach and our kind of simpatico perspective on some of this stuff is that. But that's a deeper level of work, Karen, don't you find?
Absolutely.
I can write somebody a coaching prescription for go do these 5 things between now and our next meeting. And inherently, look, sometimes that's very useful because we need a tactical understanding of like what we're actually going to do. How does that look when I'm manifesting who I'm being in that way? So that's useful. But the long game work that I do with clients, and I would imagine very much the same for you, that's long game work. We're shifting our way of being, or we're asking our clients and leaders in the organizations we're working with to shift their way of being to reflect a more accurate and authentic way of their own leadership, of their brand, of the vision, of that passion that they had when they started. And I think there's a subtle but important difference when clients are coming and saying, okay, what do I do in between our calls? And like I said, sometimes, okay, that may be useful, but I can give you an action list, but what are your thoughts on that? Like, do you find that, kind of a long game as well?
I absolutely love everything you're saying, Dan. Yes, to the long game. This work we do with our clients is a lifelong journey, and it takes reps and more reps. And you think you got it dialed in, you have a new player on the team and it challenges in a new way. You're going through different things in your own life. So it is a lifelong journey. I was thinking about how you were speaking to it. And while some of the actionable things are so important so that there's proof points, there's an opportunity for them to test and do and build confidence. Like, oh yeah, I can ride the bike without my dad pushing it, without the training wheels. I'm doing it. So I do believe that those tangible things build confidence. They build trust that things are happening.
Yeah.
Progress. But the intangibles that we're talking about, the deeper work, what I think in the long term it can do is people get to travel lighter. I have been queen at making things harder than they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
But if I know how I want to show up, I can trust myself to do that. I don't have to know how to do the other things yet, but I can trust that I'm going to be a certain way because that's my essence.
I love that. A previous guest we had, Dr. Jeremy Goldberg from Long Distance Love Bombs. I love the way he talks about it, and it's sort of in his characteristic self-deprecating way with just an abundance of humor. He's like, I'm lazy. I want to be a lazy leader. It's easier if I'm authentic. I don't have to remember shit. I get to just be me.
Right?
He's like,
and when we're authentic, we build trust.
Yeah.
There's not a hidden agenda. There's not like, what does he really mean?
Right.
Yeah. It's not transactional either.
Right.
We're really getting into the human relationships that we can't control. It's messy. It's complex.
Yeah.
And also is where loyalty comes from. It's where dedication, it's where a sense of reward. And when the team pulls together through hardship, whatever that looks like, it has real conversations.
Yeah.
Not only are we building the sense of trust, but we bring some joy back into the work.
Thank you.
Really want to see more of that.
Right. When was the last time you punched a clock for somebody, Karen?
Funny enough, so when I was started as a marketing consultant, and I was uncertain if this is what I wanted to do. And I discovered this cool sounding company, and they did B2B, B2C, and B2E. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they do it all. I want to be part of this really good team. And so I went to go work for them, and I loved their premises. They did quality work. I had some imposter syndrome going in. I didn't know if I was good enough in my field. Well, I figured I was. I did know my stuff. And so that was great. But I also went to go climb Mount Rainier, and I forgot I was supposed to ask for time off to do that. Because it's in the middle of the week, because that's the bet was the weather was perfect. It was
Right.
time to go. And I'm just like, hey, by the way, I'm going climbing Mount Rainier. And he goes, excuse me? Oh, I have to ask permission. This is
Record
hard.
scratch.
Yeah. And the other hard thing was, and this was probably about 12 or 15 years ago. And the other thing that was tricky is he and I were having this really good, robust dialogue about an idea. And I strongly disagreed with him, respectfully so. But
Yeah.
we were having this discussion and there was a lot of pushback and debate, which I thought was fantastic. And at some point, my inner voice said, Karen, I think he wants you to stop talking now. I think he's deciding this is where we're going, and I need to respect that because it's his company.
Uh-huh.
You're not his consultant, you're his employee.
Ah.
And shortly after that, I decided to go back to my own business.
For we headstrong folks, sometimes that's just the best. That's just the best route to take, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned something about, hold on. Oh, you mentioned imposter syndrome. Do you find a lot of the leaders that you work with struggling with that, either quietly or very noisily?
Can't imagine a leader not having it at some point in his or
Ah,
her profession.
yeah.
And it can come and go when you start at a new place in a new role. Maybe the market's shifting. The first time I came across that terminology, I was coaching this amazing woman at PGE, and she introduced me to the topic, and I thought, how can she have it? She's brilliant. So it's not about how good you are. It's, have you internalized your strengths? Do you have a strong awareness of who you are and the value you bring and what motivates you? And do you take inventory of the wins? Do you learn from them? Can you lean into the discomfort rather than suppressing it? And, our common ways of dealing with stress is to avoid it,
Yeah.
sweep it under the rug, bottle it up. It's uncomfortable, or we wallow in it and worry about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, if we can sit with it and not let it consume us, but be curious in that space, we can actually combat the imposter syndrome, because part of the imposter syndrome is not only are we not internalizing our strengths and our wins and celebrating the progress we're making, we are worried that we're going to screw up. Someone's going to see that we don't know what we're doing.
Right.
And so our relationships to making mistakes is so poor that we try to cover that up. It takes a lot of energy, and it's a lot of fear that we're feeding into. So I think the imposter syndrome is partly how an individual shows up and how the culture relates to making mistakes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Vulnerability is a relationship deepener. And
And
any pedantic listeners out there are going to say you just use words that don't even exist. But I think vulnerability, I mean, I didn't come up with this by any stretch. Brene Brown's got all kinds of a library of books you can read on them. But that vulnerability, think of your very best friends you've ever had in your life, or the people you've been closest with, or the people you trusted the most. Dude, they've seen you at your worst. They've held your hair back with your face in the toilet. They've seen you, whatever, like make all kinds of mistakes and love you, not only in spite of, but often because of. Those kinds of vulnerabilities are relationship deepers. And I love what you're saying there about the imposter syndrome. I'll sort of like sharpen the pencil on that and say, if you've got this self-awareness to, as you were describing, to take inventory of that. What is this story that you're telling yourself about this imposter syndrome thing? If you step back, get quiet, take some inventory on that, and you realize, you know what? I'm feeling insecure about this because bottom line is I don't know everything that maybe I feel like I should know as the leader. What a terrific opportunity for you to tap somebody else in your organization and say, you know what? I know that you over there happen to know way more about this than I do. Can you do me a favor and help explain what I'm going to really struggle at explaining? You've just given them an opportunity to lean into that and to grow from that. And you've also just, I think, enhanced the trust that your team has for you because they see you not playing an imposter, pretending to know it all. And you don't have a problem saying, I actually don't know enough about this to speak to it.
Yeah. Yeah, you do. You build trust when you can say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it in such a way that says, I don't know, and let's figure this out.
Yeah, there you go.
So that there's you're not leaving your team without direction,
That's
without
trust
support.
plus one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know if you had this experience in your 20s. I know I did, the whole fake it till you make it
Uh-huh.
experience.
Yeah.
I think that feeds into the imposter syndrome because at some point you're at a place in your career, you don't have to fake it. You've got experience, you've got some credibility,
Right.
you've got some wisdom, usually hard earned. So trust that. I came across this quote, and I wish I could tell you who came up with it, but and I was doing some research on resiliency and this idea that I think we want more certainty than we can have, right? And so the idea of building self-trust, it's the antidote. We get this, rephrase this. The antidote to uncertainty isn't actually certainty. The antidote to uncertainty is self-trust.
Say more. What's the difference there?
Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of things we have no control over. We a lot of uncertainty, especially in our world today. Rather than striving for and grasping for this certainty in making a decision, which means analysis paralysis oftentimes. If I can trust myself to navigate what's in front of me, then the uncertainty is not the boogeyman.
Right. So I don't necessarily have control over how this is going to turn out, but I know we're going to be okay anyway, whatever that outcome is.
I know my team's strengths. I know my strengths. I know we've done this before, maybe not this particular thing, but I know we've navigated hard times. And there's something about that. It doesn't mean you don't have doubt. It doesn't mean you don't.
Sure.
And it means that you have internalized the strengths and wins to know that you can trust yourself to handle it.
Yeah. Resiliency is such a big one. It's one that's kind of been under discussed thus far in season 2 of Clearing Obstacles. Will you say, because I know you're doing a lot of work on that these days. Will you say a little bit more about resiliency and why it's such a fundamental part of effective leadership?
I don't know if you've noticed this, Dan, but there's always seems to be things that trend as the phrase of the time. I call it the new business black.
Yeah.
And
I love that so much. Yeah.
Resiliency's kind of been that place. And
Yeah.
in my research, one of the things I get some resistance about resiliency, and I realized why. People perceive it in a very narrow definition. So I think people's perception of resiliency is, oh my God, that's one more thing I have to do, and I'm just almost burnt out. Being resilient, I think they think of it as strictly as grit and
muscle through.
Yeah. And it's actually this ability to prepare for, respond to stress, change, growth. These all things are going to happen anyway.
Yep.
There are these traits that anyone can build to get better at navigating those things. And one of the best things we can do is actually nurture relationships.
For resiliency.
So we tend to think of resiliency, at least I used to, as this rugged individualism.
I see where you're going.
Right? And actually, if I can ask for help, we all need a safety net.
Yeah.
When something goes awry, like, oh, it's support. People are really, I'll ask this in trainings a lot. I'll ask, how many of you are really good at asking for help? Show of hands. Not many people raise their hand.
Yeah. How
many people of you are willing to offer help if someone asks? Almost every
hand. I'll bet. Yeah.
And the aha moment is like, oh, there's a disconnect there. So resiliency, if we think of it through the lens of relationships and support and nurturing those things, then giving and receiving, because people feel better asking if they know that you're going to ask of them too. It's some reciprocal work there.
For sure.
And we level up. We rise up together. And there's some other traits, if I may, that I just think are important.
Please keep going.
Resiliency. So a lot of it is emotional intelligence. And so what that might look like is this ability to reframe. So you'll notice more resilient people tend to be more positive.
Okay.
Now, caveat, I don't want that to be a false positivity. No Pollyannas, no pretending things are just fine. That could be toxic positivity.
Right.
I used to be guilty of that. Instead, it is, you see all that's true. It's kind of, you had your guest that said his new favorite word was harmony.
Yes.
My new favorite word is equanimity.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is it allows for all those things to be true.
Yeah.
It is true that things are hard, and it is true that there's opportunity. So in a resilient minded person, they will see and feel what sucks.
Mm-hmm.
They don't pretend it's not true. They don't fight it and resist it. They don't wallow in it. They're like, this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to do with this? How could I reframe this? I mean, reframing can happen in a split second. It is sort of a silver lining. It's like, okay, what do I do with this now
Mm-hmm.
that this other thing is true? Now, that's not what I was hoping for. So you infuse a little bit of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do?
Mm-hmm.
So the art of reframing, feel what you feel, and then think of, and leaders, it's so important for them to be able to do that, because otherwise your team could get mired down in all of the reasons why not, and all the obstacles and frustrations and challenges.
Yeah.
And you invite them to see it in a way that is, I think we can do this. I think we can rise to the challenge.
I have a intimate relationship with the term reframing because it's part of what we do in coaching, I think, in general. But will you say a little bit more about reframing? Because I think there can be a lot of cynicism about that term because it feels a little inauthentic. It's like, oh, just put some polish on that and it'll look and feel better. And that's not what we really mean by reframing, right?
No, if we do it in a healthy way, we honor the difficulties, we honor the frustrations and the fear and the discomfort that comes with whatever's happening in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
The reframing is empowering. Okay, so all of those things being true, it's the not yeah, but.
It's a yes and moment.
And yeah, what can we do? What would you like to impact now? I want people to have a sense of agency rather than feeling stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think of the agency as another way of speaking to accountability. And if you think of it on this continuum, if we're being accountable, we have agency, we have a sense of ownership, we have a sense of follow through, back to that word again.
Yep.
We get stuck in victim, and we all do. We find ourselves finger pointing and blaming, and there's inertia.
Mm-hmm. So
resiliency is that place of finding this energy to kind of that bounce back to like, okay, now what?
Right. All the facts are exactly the same, but what are you going to do with those facts now? Now that you're aware of them, now that you're naming them and owning them and
suffer the discomfort of the pain and embarrassment and humility or whatever came with the experience.
Yep.
So you're not being toxically positive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the reframing, it's an exercise, and friends can help, colleagues can help. So you could say, hey, I'm really stuck on this. A coach is obviously a very good place for that.
Agreed.
And you may say, what would be another perspective to take? You're not saying you have to take it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But what might be another way to look at this?
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at 3 or 4 different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have just expanded our way of looking at this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It goes back to that story component we were talking about at the top of the call, where like, look, you can tell yourselves 15 different stories about the current condition of things as they are right now. Which story is most useful? And that to me is like an example of a reframe. We can say, oh my God, woe is us. This is the end of our company as we know it. Or you can say, yes, this is the end of our company as we know it. We get to reinvent. This is fantastic. We've never had a better opportunity.
And ultimately, people might think that we are implying that we're living in a make-believe world.
Yeah.
And a lot is on our shoulders to create it to be what it is. So there is it's malleable, which I love the fact that that's part of being a creative human being, is to put some energy into it so it goes a direction that is healthier, is more useful, is more appealing, more joyful. It's not about always if it's right or wrong. Is it working?
Yeah. What I love so much about all the points that you've brought to our conversation today is they're all pragmatic, prudent steps that we can take to build a healthier culture, build a healthier organization, lead in a more impactful way. And so they all make good business sense. But one thing that you've mentioned a couple of times now, and I just want to point it out, is all of that contributes to more joy from the overall experience. And isn't that why you got into this damn thing in the first place?
It really is. It is like one of my fundamental values. How can I bring more joy in the world?
Yeah.
And you have to have a sense of calling. I don't think everyone's going to have that in their world. Maybe they didn't really ever expect to do the profession they're doing now. Doesn't mean they can't bring joy into the world. We spend a lot of our time in our work world. And joy isn't necessarily, in my opinion, joy isn't just this feel good energy.
Right.
It's deeper than that.
Got some fulfillment to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a deeper joy that, we could be sort of hedonistic in our pursuit of joy, or we can be, and there's, hey, I'm first one to say
Nothing wrong with that at
nothing wrong
times.
with
Yeah.
that. And yes, and
Yes, and
there's a deeper sense of joy when you're bringing fulfillment into the equation, I think. And look, if you've got a team, you've got every level, you in your leadership role for client X over here, you've got you in your leadership role, you've got your managers or directors and the leadership team that you surround yourself with, and you've got supervisors. And if we go all the way through the org chart, you've got your widget makers. What kind of meaning can those widget makers actually feel? And I'll push back against that all day. I think I've been a widget maker. I've been a dishwasher. I've been a busboy. I've been like those things that are very not glamorous jobs. But at the end of the day, if you're finding some level of contribution to the bigger picture, that widget that you just made for this company that you're working for and working with is going to change the lives of X number of people and their families. And like when you can infuse some meaning into the work that's being done and the vision that exists in the organization, that's going to be its own unique face of joy that comes, I think camouflaged more in fulfillment.
This gave me goosebumps. Yeah. I think about it this way too, is a leader should know their own sort of joy producers as well as their teams. So for me, I discovered it's really joyful to cultivate others. And I'm sure you've had that experience when one of your clients has the light bulb go off, or they make a transition and they there's this growth you see, and you're in the presence of, I've gone back to clients and years later and seeing how much stronger, more vibrant they are, and I am so satisfied. I am so fulfilled. So I know that when I cultivate others, I can contribute in that way in some fashion, that some little way I might be making the world a better place.
I love that. What an elegant and concise way of kind of summarizing the conversation today. That fulfillment, that impact that you're making, is why I wanted to focus on leadership. And I've said it before, forgive me for saying it, the ripple effect that we as leaders have on everybody else around us. If we're inspiring our team to do it in a particular way and develop the culture in a particular way, and we support them in all of that, that impact is so profound. It's why I so love coaching. They're like the nuclear fuel rods, those moments that you just described, where you just go, you see the inspiration or the action or the change that has been prompted in the work that we get to do as leaders. Yeah, that floats my boat.
I hear you. And if you're a leader listening, I would encourage you to think about and pay attention to and ask questions around where are those motivators for your team? I know some people geek out on efficiency. Like, oh my gosh, I think we can do this in a more efficient way. And you can just feel their energy go up. Great. Give them an opportunity to do a process improvement.
Yeah.
Or someone's like, I think we can create a better widget. Quality really matters to them.
Great.
Find a way that they can create quality assurance programs in your organization.
Yeah.
Customer service might matter to someone else. Just find things where that person's strengths are, where they light up. And then you will have an organization that is so robust and healthy. And in the way in which they work together, I feel like it'd be unstoppable.
Agreed. I'll punctuate that. The only way you're going to get to know what those triggers are for the people on your team is to get to know them. Like, you've got to ask questions. You've got to be curious. You've got to be humble enough to get in the trenches with them enough to understand what their experience is, to have conversations with them, to listen actively about what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only way that you'll realize that Joe over there likes efficiency and Margaret over there loves widget design and so on and so on. That's the only way you'd know is take the time to get to know your people.
And then they start to feel seen and heard, which is very validating and very much a human need.
Right.
Because we're then creating a sense of belonging in our organization. And I don't know if you got to see the Surgeon General's statement about loneliness as an epidemic.
There's an op-ed in the New York Times just this weekend, right?
Hey, I think that was a follow-up. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's a fascinating report. And the idea is that so many Americans are feeling a sense of loneliness, obviously post-pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
But if we are operating on autopilot in our work environments, if we're not coming from a place of purpose, if we're not being seen and heard, then we're punching the clock,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not bringing your best self. You're not inspired. The organization's not getting the best results.
Right.
And flip that on its side, create a sense of belonging where people feel heard and seen and can contribute to a greater good.
Yeah.
You've just created something our whole country needs, our whole world needs, to combat the sense of loneliness, bring a sense of connection.
We are propagating a culture, whether we know it or not. That can be a culture of loneliness, or it can be a culture of abundance and inclusion and belonging. It's up to you, man. It's like you're cultivating either way. You may as well grow something that's useful and fruitful.
Right. And I want to underscore something here. In the work we're talking about doing, I don't want a leader to misunderstand something. People can hear this and think we are not talking about driving business results. All of this stuff we're talking about drives business results.
Right.
We have to have clarity about what those results are, what the metrics are, what the key performance indicators are, and all the litany of corporate words we can use.
Yeah.
But if we have some direction and clarity of what we're trying to impact and do together, and we're building the kind of culture that really matters, that is so incredibly impactful. You get both the business results and a vibrant community.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, the proof is in all, I mean, we could list all kinds of countless examples of companies who are doing it right. And, I mean, if a leader's looking for an example, go study some of the best examples that are out there. Identify the companies who are doing it the way you wish you were doing it, and read books by their leaders. Find those leaders reading lists that they, maybe they haven't written anything. Maybe they just have their own reading list. Like, stand on the shoulders of giants and figure this stuff out by example, because those companies who are running humane, empathetic, conscientious companies, they're the ones who are differentiating themselves, especially in today's world, as you described it. It's just, propagating loneliness left and right.
What I'm also noticing is those companies that are doing exactly what you just said, Dan, they attract some really high caliber people.
Right.
And they retain them because the A players want to work somewhere where they're challenged and promoted and encouraged and supported. And they want that sense of everyone's rising together.
Yeah.
They don't want people to be slackers.
Yeah.
They want to be challenged in a way that they're going to grow as a professional, that they're going to find ways to thrive.
Right.
So when you create the right kind of culture, you attract the kind of people that get it and that they want to contribute. So it continues to feed on itself.
I couldn't agree more, man. And I've worked with two clients in particular recently who have just bemoaned how difficult it is to retain good people. And in both cases, now I'm not going to say it's universal across the board, but in those two case studies of clients that I've had, I had to ask a very pointed question and say, are you running the kind of company that will attract and retain the good people that you're talking about, that you're craving? And the answer was a very humble and illuminating no from both of them. And
well, good on you for having the courage to ask the question.
That's a tough one to ask and answer, man.
It is. Yeah. But good on them too, to pause and be honest with themselves. That's where we can start making changes.
100%.
Not defending ourselves the way we are, the status quo, but being humble enough to say, either I don't know, or I don't know, I have some blind spots. Can you help me see them?
Yeah.
So I can run this differently.
What a fantastic conversation with you today, Karen. I sure appreciate all the different ways to bring in resiliency and awareness of team dynamics, imposter syndrome, emotional intelligence, the compassion that we've talked about, all of that. If somebody wants to engage with you or learn more about what you do and maybe work with you, Karen, how would they go about doing that?
I would love them to give me a call, check out my website, see me on LinkedIn, any of those places. I often do an introductory call just to get to know each other, explore what they're looking at, what challenges they're facing, what kind of impacts they'd like to have.
Terrific. I will make sure that we put the links to get in touch with you in the show notes. And anybody that wants more information with Karen or Best Self Coaching, the information will be there for you. Take a look at that. Karen, thank you so much for your time today. I sure appreciate it. I'm sure we're going to have an abundance of conversations after this that our listeners will.
I sure hope so. Time goes by so fast, and
crazy.
Such a pleasure. One of these times we're going to either be in Portland or Ashland, and we'll have to grab a whiskey or a wine and be able to have no restraints on the conversation.
I like that idea. We get a little more boisterous and colorful in our language too, perhaps.
It won't be recorded though, right?
No, dear God, no. Karen, thank you again.
So much fun.
I appreciate it.
You are so good at this. Let me know if there's ways I can support you.
Will do. We at Best Self Coaching hope you got all that you came here for from today's episode. And if you want more like this, be sure to follow and subscribe to Clearing Obstacles on your favorite listening platform. You can also go to bestself.coach/podcast for more information. There you'll find more episodes and links to the content discussed today, as well as info on how you can get in touch if you're interested in clearing your own obstacles to become the kind of leader that you know your team is waiting for. Your business should serve your life, so let us help you get there from here, because nobody should do this on their own. Thanks again for listening. See you soon.